Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Talking Mode. I'm your host, Caroline, and alongside with me is Margot.
Hi. In this episode, we're going to talk about how media actually interprets our lives. So that's basically how we see what's there, like what's in our life, what's in front of us through the lens of media. So let's get started. Caroline, so as we are doing the series on difference between the East and the West, how does the media portray lives of different regions, specifically the East and the West?
So for me, I think like the way media portray our lives is mirrored and reflected through the lens of culture. Because in a sense, media is kind of portraying the culture and our beliefs and our concepts. And the fact that the cultures and the traditional beliefs between the West and the East are so vastly different. I think that's one of the reasons why there was a difference in the way media portray our lives in the first place. In this episode, we're trying to focus more on a kind of video-based media rather than pictures and infographies. We're trying to talk about the films and the news and all of those video formatted media. For example, when we go out to the cinema and we see for example Western film and stuff, and there might be some very sexual activities that according to Asian traditional beliefs are considered as inappropriate, but in the Western region those activities are considered rather normal and even appropriate and accepted to an extent. And so that's just one example I can think of, that the media portrays the differences between the cultural beliefs between the two different regions. Another example is how media in the West and in the East, they portray love and romantic relationships. Like we see in the kind of coming of age teenager films, love, even though that love is for teenagers, they are usually sometimes involve some sexual activities and sexual charismatic scenes and stuff. Whereas in the East, especially in Vietnam, I don't see that typical chemistry, like, very sexual chemistry between the two main characters. And I think that's very interesting. But again, with the kind of globalization and the lines between the two cultural beliefs kind of got blurred and mixed together, like we discussed in the previous episode. Many people nowadays, especially we, like in the East nowadays, we see those sexual activities and we kind of consider them accepted to an extent. And I think that's how powerful the media could be, and it could really influence the way we think and completely change our traditional beliefs to fit with the current demands and desires. That's my opinions on that. What's yours?
I totally agree. I think that, well, in the West, they tend to be more like open with sexual relationships, and and they're not like they're very open about the whole thing. You can see like the TV, like the British TV series Sex Education. Well, now they're very kind of popular here because they explored a side of education that mostly people like students or audiences from the East don't really get to talk about much in their daily lives. And so I think I like, just like you said, with globalizations, it just brings the whole thing closer and closer to the audience. However, still there are boundaries as to like, even though that the media portrayed that all that aspect, we're still not very there. We're not just like the
agree.
like there's because somehow when there are many projects now that actually talks empower and encourage young people now to talk about their sex and explore all kinds of relating to sex. But still, when we actually talk to them face to face, they are kind of very shy, and they just they kind of like, there's a very clear line as to, we don't want to discuss that. There's something that they want to empower maybe online, but in their mind, like deep in their mind, it's just not there yet.
Agree. Like even like through posts, Instagram posts, not just like offline conversation, we tend to get scared away by those very bold, topics. Like I know some people like Vietnamese, for example, podcasters and Instagram influencers, they choose to talk openly about sex and yeah, exploring like you said. But sometimes when I look at their content, I just got very uncomfortable seeing how bold and how open they are, and I still can't get used to that. So yeah, that proves like there are still boundaries to what is considered normal for us.
And I think that it's with the language too. You see, when we actually hear it and actually use the words talked about, it's kind of,
yeah, especially in Vietnamese, it's harder, right?
Yeah, I mean, the series Cởi Mở from Etc. Like actually, the whole thing, it's for anything that's relating to sex, and
and other podcasts,
different sex positions and things. But I mean, to listen to it, maybe I could listen maybe from just alone, but maybe with everyone in the room or actually having a conversation about it, then I don't think I'm just ready, because we've been raised here and the whole thing, it's just okay. So to what extent do you think that those information which are portrayed through media are accurate?
This question reminded me of Netflix films. Like nowadays there's a trend going on about creating films and documentaries and series based on the past and past traditional beliefs and past even outfits and fashion. For example, the series Bridgerton we watch, and even in that series, when there are some videos on YouTube where people kind of review and they reacted to that series, and when they point out, especially from the experts from anthropology or archaeologists or even like fashion experts, they pointed out the different alterations that the producer did to the actual culture of, for example, England, because that film is taking place in England, and there are of course some alterations. I don't know whether
glamorize it, like they kind of like glamorize the life, maybe more than it's actually was, because after all, it's media, right?
Because that's why I'm not sure if they are doing those alteration because of the mass audience or because of some other reasons, because it's very interesting hearing the chief producer of that series, he or she, I can't remember, talked about how the film is trying to embrace the history, but at the same time they did some alteration to the history itself. So because of that, I feel like the information, it's of course not 100% true, like any other films, because it is at the end of the day cater to the mass audience. And when it comes to the mass audience, there are many conflicting opinions on a particular topic. So especially when it comes to cultural and beliefs and all of those very macro topics. And I think like we cannot fully trust the information online, especially when it comes to concepts and beliefs. But they have to portray some sense of truth, because at the end of the day, if they are trying to create a series based on the history, they need to embrace and respect the history by incorporating in some sort of truths. So I would say there's a mix of truths and half truths and even mistruths as well. So that's my answer.
I think that's a very fun, like interesting point that you've touched on, because I feel like a lot of media, they actually use kind of like abuse the fact that people are very interested into what happened in the past, because there are not many informations available to and so they kind of alter the information to to keep up with the command, like a demand of their audience. And somehow we just got too caught up in that, and we actually believe the whole things because everything is just so glamorous, and or maybe it's cruel. It's like way too cruelty. They kind of like on both, like kind of make it very extreme somehow. And it's totally, I don't know, just drawn me into watching it. So I guess that after the point we discussed, I think that it's very important that we, do a fact check on, fact check all the information that we have conceived from those media. How are people affected by the media?
How are people affected by the media? Of course, people are affected by media, but I would say it's a combination of both good influences and bad influences at the same time. Because circle back to the series that we're talking about, Bridgerton. Even though there are some half truths, there are some alterations, of course. Even though they glamorize the history in order to fit the current demands from the audience, they're also trying to encourage and motivate audience to study about the past. I feel like that's a very interesting way. Of course, when we see it like this, then there's a good influence on audience. But I would say that influences, like good influences, are not outweighed by the bad ones, because we're talking about the cultural beliefs at the end of the day. And when it comes to cultural, we cannot just mix half truths in it. So again, it reminded me about this the series Emily in Paris.
Right, yeah,
that's kind of a controversial series, because when I watched that series, I enjoyed it, but when I went on YouTube and I watch reviews, people are furious about that series because they see it in a sense. That series is about Americans trying to undermine French culture.
Take over the whole
ways.
thing.
It's so interesting, and you can see how just a single alteration in culture can lead to such a huge backlash, even almost. And even the main actress Lily Collins, she had to speak up and voice her opinions on being cast as the main character for that film, because the way she acted can create controversy among audience, especially French people. It's interesting seeing they got so infuriated about that series, but at the same time, like, just think about it. If there was a show to be made about Vietnamese culture, and there were some alteration and half truths and even insult within that series, I would be furious too. So I would say
like they trying to making a stereotypes, and you feel like, no,
yes,
we're not like that.
100%. So that's where the bad influences come from. Like, they just imprint certain beliefs that are so biased and towards everything, like the international relation between countries, and even within one country, there are just some conflicts that shouldn't be talked about. And if they were to talk about those conflicts, they should do it in a very nuanced way and not so obvious when it comes to when we talk about French versus America. And there are also macro, more bigger topics like gender inequality and just very sensitive topics like body image and just, sex, like everything of that. It's not talked about enough, and it's not portrayed well enough and accurately. So in that sense, I feel like it has a negative influence on people.
True. I think that also that's the goal of media anyway, because if media is not there to provoke thoughts, to draw on sides, then it's actually not very, it will not create so much an effect on the audience, right? Because we tend to be really drawn to something that it's controversial, something that's it's a top of the town. So basically they are attacking that that way that we think, that psychology, and so they kind of use it to make it their shows, their series become popular. So next we're going to talk about something that is very, very interesting, and in which Caroline and I really have so much strong opinions on. It's about what we have seen, what we have watched online, through televisions, on the news, compared to what we actually experienced. So in short, expectation versus reality. So Caroline, through which media that you find you're most in contrast with, between the expectations and reality?
Okay, got it. So just a little disclaimer before we dive into the topic. So with this particular chunk of the video, we're not trying to compare between the West and the East, and we're just maybe focusing more on the scenario that's happening right now in Vietnam, because I feel like this is an important point to make when it comes, because whenever we talk about media, we need to talk about the contrast between expectation and reality, because that just poses a question to maybe our podcast or later viewers, that the media is not always correct, and that's not always raw and unedited. It's always edited, but to an extent that edited. And so yeah, for your answer, so the number one, like the medium of media that I'm most kind of against, not like fully against, or I'm just feeling uncomfortable, whenever I come face to face with it, is the news and the kind of national broadcast channel within our country. We just discussed this earlier, the second before we press record this episode, is that especially during the pandemic going on right now, there are certain aspects of our lives that are so glamorized to an extent, like that it kind of became mistruth and not just half truth anymore, which is dangerous, because I don't know about you or any other people, but seeing how vastly different the media claims and the reality is very disturbing for me. So to be specific, like in Vietnam, because of the pandemic, there are many programs to help, to aid, to provide for the citizens, right? For example, the different food programs like food aid or food providing programs, but the media claims that all people or all citizens receive those packages of food. There are of course many other aspects. I understand where they're coming from. They're trying to lift up the national spirit and stuff, but I feel like we shouldn't stray away from the truth that much, because the people know what it's up to.
But
and
they still keeping up with the not truth, like, because I don't know, I tuned in too much, like they spreading news that people should be open about whether they're tested for COVID or they're like negative or positive, and then we have waste. But then, or like in the case of food, like even if you are not in the restricted area, you still receive like shareable food, right? Like, but still many families, they actually haven't received until this day, which is like around 3 months of lockdown. And also like they really boast, like they talk a lot about there's not a shortage of food. However, that's not something that we experience. All the supermarkets around, like the markets are closed, and the supermarkets there are flooded with customers and with limited food, right? And they restricted, actually we can only buy 2 packs of vegetables, or 100 grams or 200 grams of meat or something like that. It's like super restricted, but however, I mean, that's not what they talked about on television.
And even there is a supply for food, they're trying to shape it, shape the kind of market in a way that is so unfair. So I think about the the combo thing that's going on. Like, I think it shouldn't have existed in the first place. Or for example, into a bundle, and in that sense they can obviously reduce the price, but that just limit our options to choose from. So for example, my family doesn't need to eat asparagus or something, because that's not essential, but then they kind of bundle those up, and we have no ideas but to buy asparagus. And so that's kind of a little bit of the inconvenience.
Kind of like they force us into a very I don't know, like a position where we cannot move. We just have to follow, right? cannot do any otherwise.
And another thing that I'm kind of furious about is that they don't talk much about the step-by-step process in which we can check our vaccination profile. So there's a online portal for that to check the information for vaccination but of course that I only saw like the national broadcast channel, they talked about that once, and they didn't even elaborate enough, because my dad then got confused and I then got confused because I don't know how it worked, because those are very serious things, and they didn't even elaborate that enough, but they went on and talk about other kind of nonsense. Like they talk about a day in the life of a, I don't know, it makes no sense for me.
Basically all the news got it's not like you don't even know when they will, like they don't really talk about the important thing, they just kind of go around and around, and then sometimes the important thing comes up, but they're just there for like 15 minutes and then it's off. Basically we really don't know how what's true. Very ironic, because you said it's the news and it's supposed to be the voice for the people, however it's just went crazy. And
I recognize this whole pattern that's going on, like every day talk about education and how the government is trying to kind of adapt and adjust the education system. Like I got it that they're trying to do that, but there are other things that need to be talked about, like the vaccination process and the whole online portal, because Vietnamese citizens, like even us, we are not accustomed to using such platforms, especially for very important like events like vaccination. And there are some errors, like sometimes the server is completely crashed, which is super annoying. And it's everything, it's messed up, and they don't even talk about the government is trying to fix that problem. And I don't see where they are trying to go with that whole online portal, because that's basically our database, right? And if we cannot keep up with our database, then what else could we do? Like I don't know. That's my kind of heated thoughts.
So I think that's a piece of something that we really want to share with our podcastees, right, on this topic. And there are so much more with the time limit. So that is for today. We hope you enjoy this podcast. So stay tuned, stay safe, and
stay awesome. Bye.
Bye.